It was early 1943. The Russians were desperately defending the Eastern Front. The rest of the Allied forces had swept the Germans from Africa. The Axis was in complete control of continental Europe, and the Allies had agreed to open a second front to relieve the pressure on the Russians.
Their objective was to cross the Mediterranean and invade Europe. If the Germans anticipated the landing location, they would concentrate their forces in opposition. The Allies were desperate to deceive the Germans about their intended invasion point on Sicily, so they planned fake invasions of Greece and Sardinia.
Charles Chumley suggested to his boss, Commander Evan Montagu, that they let the Germans find a dead British pilot with fake orders about the bogus invasion point. Glender Michael, a Welsh suicide, became the fictional lost pilot, William Martin. The project was named Operation Mincemeat.
The next step was to build a backstory, complete with a photo of a girlfriend, love letters, and a receipt for an engagement ring. The most important piece of the deception was the packet of letters the fictional officer would carry, suggesting an invasion in Greece and Sardinia, instead of the real invasion point, Sicily.
On April 30th, 1943, the submarine Seraph took the chilled corpse to the Spanish coast and released it through a torpedo tube to drift into shore. Because the British codebreakers of Bletchley Park could decipher German messages, the Allies knew that the Germans took the bait. Allied deception led the Germans to move a full panzer division to Greece. 20,000 soldiers no longer on the coast of Sicily to oppose the Allied troops when they landed on July 9, 1943. The success of Operation Mincemeat not only took Italy out of the war, it was a turning point in the acceptance of deception as a strategic military tool.
The Allies immediately turned to deception strategies in a concerted effort to exploit German fears about Allied plans to invade Europe through Norway. The fictional British Fourth Army was headquartered in Edinburgh Castle. The Scottish deception, Fortitude North, was based primarily on fake radio traffic. The Royal Air Force sent 3 squadrons to conduct winter training exercises. As a military build-up to the imaginary invasion, British commandos destroyed Norwegian factories, ports, and power stations.
The Fortitude North deception campaign was so effective that the Germans had transferred 13 army divisions from the Russian front to Norway by April 1944, at least 250,000 troops who were not at the Russian front and who were not sent to defend Normandy. The success of Fortitude North was a turning point for both the Russian defense of the Eastern Front and the D-Day invasion.
Looking at any map, the most obvious path of invasion for the Allies would be from Dover, England to Calais, France. As long as the Germans believed that Calais would be the focus of the invasion, they would concentrate men, equipment, and fortifications in that area. The Allies planned the Fortitude South deception operations to reinforce the German assumption.
The Germans were absolutely certain that General Patton would be a leader in the Allied invasion. Although General Patton was being punished, with the German obsession with Patton, he still had a huge role to play. For the deception operation named Fortitude South, he was made the commander of the 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, a fictitious army located in Dover.
The fictitious Allied Army Group would contain approximately 1 million men. The goals were to persuade the Germans that the main target of the Allied assault was the Pas-de-Calais area and that the target date was D+45, or 45 days after the Normandy invasion.
Deception crews erected fictitious troop camps that contained buildings built out of wood, wire, sewer pipe, and canvas, supplemented by highly accurate inflatable tanks, aircraft, artillery, and boats to trick the Germans into believing that the primary invasion force was being assembled.
It came wrapped in a small bag. You took the tank out, you spread it out, it was flat with nozzles. Each grabbed a nozzle with a bicycle compressor and pump. Little by little, this tank would rise.
To enhance the effectiveness of physical deception, the Allies developed a complete library of sounds for all types of army units. For example, sonic units played the noise of the revving of aircraft engines at dummy airfields with fake recognition beacons and phony aircraft.
Other deception engineers used scripts and a pair of radio transmitters to simulate the radio chatter of an entire battalion to match what the Germans would expect to hear from all the equipment they thought was there.
On D-1, new deceptions were added. To simulate an airborne division parachuting into the Calais area, 200 stuffed burlap dummies were dropped. German troops rushed the landing zones, while real paratroopers were dropped elsewhere.
There were 2 deception techniques used to simulate bomber squadrons and fleets of ships. Sir Robert Cockburn had discovered that window, metallized paper strips, jettisoned from a few high-flying aircraft, could create the impression that thousands of bombers were attacking, or an entire fleet of ships was approaching. Reflectors placed inside balloons attached to small boats could give the radar appearance of a 5,000-ton ship. Captured German reports with inflated ship counts confirmed that the deception had been successful.
As a real invasion force prepared to leave for France, Patton's imaginary force took up residence in the vacated camp. Deception radio teams took over their wireless activity, which prevented the Germans from noticing their departure.
Were these elaborate deceptions successful? By the middle of May 1944, the Germans anticipated an Allied invasion force twice as large as the real force of available men and material. On D-1, a situation report issued by Field Marshal von Rundstedt suggested that the invasion was not imminent.
In addition to the military success of the Fortitude deception, Fortitude was a personal triumph for the most successful British double agent, Spaniard Juan Pujol Garcia. Garcia was such a successful double agent that he was awarded both the German Iron Cross and the British Order of the Empire.
The Germans gave Garcia the codename Alaric and called his network of 27 informants Arabelle. The British gave Garcia the codename Garbo. They did not name his network because they knew his network was entirely imaginary.
On June 9th, 3 days after the beginning of the D-Day invasion of Normandy, Garbo sent a 2-hour transmission detailing the concentration of Fusag forces in major East British ports. He estimated that there were 50 divisions prepared to attack the Pas de Calais. Garbo told the Germans that the Normandy landings were a large-scale operation, but diversionary in character.
When Hitler received the message, he called a midnight conference. Following that conference, he canceled the order to move the 7 divisions of the 15th Army from Calais to Normandy, more than 150,000 soldiers not reinforcing the entrenchments in Normandy. Clearly, the successful deception of the imaginary landing in Calais was a turning point in the success of the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944.
The success of Fusag was not just critical to the D-Day landings. It was equally critical that Fusag keep the Germans distracted after D-Day. Although the deception goal was to keep the Germans in Calais for 2 weeks, it kept the 15th Army in Calais for almost 7 weeks. Even then, the Germans believed that the invasion at Calais had simply been cancelled because of the success of the invasion at Normandy. But by that time, it did not matter. The Allies had swept across France.
The Allies continued to use the deception techniques learned in Fusag as they moved through France. Specially trained squadrons known as camouflage engineers deployed all sorts of tricks. One technique was to drive a troop truck in loops through a village with only 2 men in the back, pretending to be a full division. On each run-through, the men would change their uniform insignia and the markings on the vehicle so that German collaborators would note the presence of multiple battalions.
A real tank really tears up the land when it goes through. And we had our own half-tracks that would grind up a path to it. So from the air, it looked like a real tank was in there.
A real unit would be redeployed and a camouflage engineers unit would step in with their inflatable equipment. When actually engaged by the enemy, veteran camouflage engineer Jack Macy told us about using fireworks to create the expected racket from firing.
Secrecy surrounding the role of the camouflage engineers was so tight that neighboring real units were unaware of their presence. Veteran camouflage engineer Arthur Shilstone told us of getting yelled at by an American captain for not being with the redeployed unit they were impersonating.
The statement of Field Marshal von Rundstedt confirmed that his French deployment was based on the assumption of a much larger Allied force than was really present. Without knowing what he was describing, he gave the deception units the nickname of the Ghost Army.
The corpse of the imaginary William Martin persuaded the Germans that southern Europe would be invaded through Greece and Sardinia rather than in Sicily. The Germans were forced to prepare for both invasion through Norway and at the Pas de Calais. The deception transmissions of double agent Juan Pujol Garcia magnified the risk of these imaginary threats. The success of each of these deceptions was a turning point in the battle for Europe. These cumulative successes resulted in the German surrender on VE Day on May 8, 1945, the ultimate turning point in World War II.